Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa tabi'ina lahum bi ihsanin ila yawm ad-din. Wa alayna ma'ahum wa fihim bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. And these are intentions of the author for when we do mudhakara, mutual reminding of the likes of this text. Nawayna at-ta'alluma wa at-ta'aleem. We intend to learn and teach. وَالنَّفَعْ وَالْإِنْتِفَاعْ, to give and receive benefit. وَالتَّذْكِيرُ وَالْمُذَاكَرَةِ, to remind as well as mutually remind or take admonition. وَالْإِفَادَةُ وَالْإِسْتِفَادَةُ, and to give and receive gain. And the difference between that and benefit is a fa'ida is like a specific point that you gain from a lesson. والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, as well as urging adherence to Allah's book and the sunnah of His Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم. والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير, and calling to guidance and leading to good. ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى, seeking in all of that Allah's countenance, Allah's pleasure, nearness to Allah and His reward subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also intend what the author, Al-Imam Abdullah Al-Haddad, intended, as well as our sheikhs and the pious, and what Allah knows of good intentions, and we ask Allah to accept. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. O Allah, aid us in remembering you, thanking you, and worshipping you well. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba' wa arina al-batila batinan warzuqna ijtinaba. O Allah, show us the truth as truth and give us to adhere to it or follow it closely. And show us falsehood as it is, and give us to avoid it in khair and lutf and afiyah. And we ask you, O Allah, Rabbana zidna ilma, O Allah, increase us in knowledge. Wa barik lana wa wasi' lana arzaqina, and bless for us what you have provided for us, or expand for us what you have provided for us. Wa barik lana fima razaqtana, and bless us in what you have provided for us. Wajalna mahbubina fi qulubi ibadika wa aza'a fi uyunihim, and make us beloved to the hearts of your servants and dear in their eyes. وَوُجَهَاءَ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ وَمِنَ الْمُقَرَّبِينَ, and O Allah, make us of prominent station in this world and the next, and of those brought near. يا كثير النوال يا حسن الفعال يا قائما بلا زوال فلك الحمد والمنة والشرف على كل حال وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم. So this book, الدعوة التامة والتذكرة العامة. This book is called The Complete Summons or Invitation. The Complete Da'wah, which is a prophetic phrase referring specifically to the adhan. However, he's applying it generally to the invitation of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The complete summons and the general reminder. This is a text by a great Imam, the Imam Al-Imam Abdullah, son of Alawi, son of Muhammad, Al-Haddad, known more commonly just as Al-Imam Al-Haddad. Sometimes they'll say Al-Imam Abdullah Al-Haddad. He lived in the end of the 11th Hijri century and the beginning of the 12th. He lived from 1044 to 1132. Allah yarhamu. He is regarded in his tradition as the reviver of the 12th Islamic century. The shuyukh who followed in the tradition that he represents said that all of those who came after him, they take light from his lamp. He's of the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ through his grandson Hussein. He is from the inhabitants of the city of Tarim in the province of Hadramaut, where he was born and resided, died, and is buried. He is from the descendants in the closer lineage to a great Imam whose name was Ahmad bin Isa al-Muhajir. Ahmed, the son of Isa, the migrant. He was the first of those of this specific Husseini family who migrated in the 4th century from Iraq to Hadramaut, where he settled and established his family on a path of knowledge, practice, and summoning to Allah. He's the one who brought Sunni Islam to Hadramaut. Prior to that, they were primarily a sect of the Khawarij called Abadiyya. Right? So he brought the Shafi'i school there and Ahl Sunnah understanding to Hadramaut, and through his knowledge and akhlaq and wealth, he was quite wealthy. He supported the dawah of Sunni Islam and established a tradition there. He is a descendant, so Imam al-Haddad goes to al-Muhajir, and then all of those who attribute to, who their lineage is traced up to Muhajir, they're the people who are known as Asada al-Ba'alawi. And that initial grandfather al-Muhajir, he's Ahmed, the son of Isa, the son of Muhammad, and Naqib, the son of Ali al-Uraydi, the son of Ja'far al-Sadiq, the son of Muhammad al-Baqir, the son of Ali Zain al-Abidin, who's the son of Hussein, the son of Ali, and Hussein's also the son of Sayyidina Fatima, the daughter of Allah's Messenger. Right? So they were a family of Husseini prophetic descendants who, according to the Imam in some of his other books, father to son, they remained Sunni all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they're Husseini, but they're Sunni, not cursing the prophetic companions or slipping into any of that type of fitna that some members of that prophetic household or those who attributed themselves to that perhaps slipped. And they are the family, 8 of which traveled to Indonesia, and 8 of the 9 awliya in Indonesia who spread Islam in Indonesia and other areas in that part of Southeast Asia, they're attributed to this family, and they come from the same tradition that Al-Imam Haddad represents. So they're one of the distinctions of, or one of the characteristics of their tradition is that they had a lot of concern for summoning to Allah. And despite being engaged in, scholarship of the various disciplines and also spirituality, their tariqah is known as the tariqah Asada al-Abi Alawi. Their public face was not that. Their public face was dawah to just the Sharia in general. So you'll find Imam al-Haddad's books, there's a lot of focus there. A lot of verses of Allah's book, sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, very, conservative, broadly accepted statements of imams, and a focus on applying those and summoning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam al-Haddad, as we mentioned, he was born in 1044 in the city of Tarim, which later became their base. Al-Muhajir is actually buried outside of Tarim by about 20 minutes. And he lived in a village called Husaysa, which is no longer exists. His grave is about all that's in the place where he's buried, other than a masjid and a school that's been built more recently. So they've lived a couple other places, and then eventually settled in a city called Tarim. Tarim is a very blessed city. Tarim has the highest concentration of members of the family of the Prophet ﷺ anywhere on the surface of the earth. And essentially they took it as like, if we had monasteries in Islam, Tarim would essentially be like a monastery. Like the whole town were like, people that were on a very kind of elect path. They say that the elect, the commoner in Tarim is like the elect elsewhere. And Tarim's history stretches to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So there are masajid there that were established by his companions. Abbad bin Bishr al-Ansari settled there, and he established a masjid in Tarim called Masjid Wa'il. Wa'il is Arabic for an ibex. That masjid is still, it still exists. And when the Prophet ﷺ passed, we know that one of the challenges that confronted Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was apostasy, and also refusing zakat. So areas of Hadramaut apostated, and even some of those battles are listed in our books of history. Specific regions in Hadramaut, we saw some of our teaching that portion of history, and they would mention this village over there, and describing battles that took place during those battles of apostasy that Sayyidina Abu Bakr was confronted with. Tarim did not apostate. Tarim corresponded with Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and asked for reinforcements and hosted the Sahaba when they came to Hadramaut in order to engage in fighting. It's not jihad against apostates, it's different, but fighting and subduing that rebellion. La ilaha illallah. So there's like a masjid that's called Masjid Al-Ribat. And what is that? That's where the Sahaba, when they descended into the valley, because if you look at pictures of Hadramaut, it's like a rift valley with very steep walls. Though there's a pathway to Medina that goes over the plateau through the desert towards Al-Medina, and they descended a certain canyon in Hadramaut, and they tied their horses there when they arrived in Tarim, and so that there's a masjid marking that spot where those companions came. So when this correspondence reached Sayyidina Abu Bakr that Tarim had not apostated, he made dua for Tarim, the city of Tarim. He made dua that Allah would keep it developed, that it would not fall into ruin, right? That it would remain ma'mur, as you say. And you'll see other villages in Hadramaut. The old part of town is ruins. They're mud brick houses, so over time they'll become ruins, and then the people have moved to a different place. But Tarim isn't like that. What's ruined gets rebuilt. It's on the same footprint that it was always on, just that it's expanded. So he made dua that it would not fall into ruin. He made dua that Allah would make plentiful there the pious, right? And sometimes they narrate the scholars. And he also made dua that Allah would bless its water, right? So despite it being a desert place, it has large aquifers. There's many, many wells there. There's been a history of scholarship, for like solid, very strong scholarship for at least 800 years in Tarim. And Sahaba there, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and then also it's remained not falling into ruin. There are also Sahaba that history records, some of them from the companions of Badr, that were brought to Tarim and buried during that confrontation. So that's the environment in which Imam al-Haddad was born, and both his father and his mother are Sharifs, so Sharif on both sides, and both of them were from scholarly families. He was born very given to study as a young man, despite the fact that he was blinded by smallpox in his infancy. But he said of himself as a child that he didn't play or do other things like children who couldn't see. He was like a normal child in a lot of what he did, though he was blinded very young. He said of himself that he had a lot of mujahada as a child, and he would decrease some of his mujahada because his grandmother would tell him that he was exerting himself too much. And from his mujahadat, when he would return from Quran school at the duha time, so studying from Fajr until duha, or from early morning until later in duha time, the mid-morning time, from his mujahadat, there's a masjid called Masjid Ba'alawi. It's the first masjid that the Sada established when they resided in Tarim. He would pray 100 rakas at duha time in Masjid Ba'alawi. So that's 8 of duha is 8 to 12 rakas. So then that's nafil mutlaq beyond that. That's from his mujahadat. He memorized the Quran at an early age, and then after that began studying Bidayatul Hidayah of Al-Imam al-Ghazali, and memorizing a book in fiqh called Al-Irshad. At the age of 16, he began to seclude himself in a masjid called Masjid al-Hujayra, and a lot of the masajid there, they'll have like an inner section that's roofed, a slightly outer section that might be roofed but not walled with pillars, and a roof but no walls, and then a section that's just a courtyard, somewhat resembling the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. and then a lot of times off those courtyards they'll have rooms, right? And somehow his family was included in the waqf of Masjid al-Hujayra. So they had a haq to reside in that room, but he also took permission from those who were maintaining the masjid. So he began to seclude himself in a room in this masjid at the age of 16. He also married that year, right? So he would visit his wife, the first of his wives. He married 2 or 3 wives. He would visit her, but he would spend much or most of his time in seclusion in this room off Masjid al-Hujayra, though he also taught during that time. He spent the majority of 11 years secluding himself at Masjid al-Hujayra, and from his mujahadat during that time, he would walk in the night to various masjids in Tarim, and Tarim is known for many masajid. At one point, most of the homes, but a home there is like a complex, because it will be a father and his sons and his unmarried daughters and his sons' wives and those children, right? So that, like it might be 30, 40 people living in a home, and sometimes homes will be clustered. And also in a tribal society, they'll say Dar Fulan or Diyar Fulan. It'll be a cluster of homes that are a given tribe. But most of those homes had a masjid attached to it, right? So there would be a section that was a waqf of a masjid that was attached to their home, and then later the home might no longer exist, but obviously the masjid has to be maintained. So there's like 360 little masjids at least in Tarim, though Jummah would be prayed where? In the Jama', right? In the central congregational prayer mosque. But there's these smaller masajid in the neighborhoods where people pray their daily prayers, some of them very, very close to their homes. So from his mujahadat, he would walk with a servant who assisted him, and he might pray 2 rakas in each of those masjids, right? So he had a lot of qiyam in the night. He's also, as we mentioned, he taught, and then he also authored works. Most of his books have been translated. This is one of them, The Complete Summons. Book of Assistance is one of the more famous ones, and others, Lives of Man. He has a volume of poetry known as his Diwan, and then he also has litanies like Widr Latif and the Ratib as-Shahir, all of which are beneficial. He is regarded, as we mentioned, as the reviver of the 12th century by the scholars of his tradition, and one of the distinctions of this text is that he lists the revivers from the 1st century through like maybe about the first millennium. He mentions those who are regarded as the reviver. So like he'll mention Al-Imam al-Shafi'i, he'll mention Al-Imam al-Ghazali in the 5th century, and so on. So in a sense you could say that it's a book of da'wah, but also a book that discusses tajdeed. One of his nicknames was Qutbatul Da'wati wal Irshad, the axis of summoning to Allah and guidance. Another of his nicknames is the Heartsmith. Haddad means a blacksmith, but they would call him Haddad al-Qulub, so the Heartsmith. So this is a text, a da'wah at-tamma, that this imam, that again is called Qutbatul Da'wah, the pillar of da'wah in his tradition due to his great summoning to Allah, and also the other works that he engaged in, such as teaching or authoring, that were means to invite to Allah. So it's a book that he authored about summoning to Allah, right? We will read at least the introduction, inshallah. And oftentimes Islamic works, particularly seminal works, the introduction itself is a treatise, right? So our shuyukh advise us to read certain introductions, right? And as standalone treatises, like the well-known Muqaddimah of Ibn Khaldun, right? That's Muqaddimah means what? The introduction of Ibn Khaldun, but that's a standalone treatise, essentially like in Islamic sociology. Another introduction that is to be read is the Muqaddimah of the Sharh of the Sahih of Imam Muslim, authored by Al-Imam al-Nawawi, as is the Sharh, right? So that's like a treatise in Ilm al-Hadith. The Muqaddimah also of Imam al-Nawawi that he authored on a book called Majmu'a, which is a commentary on a great fiqh work in the Shafi'i school, Al-Muhadhab, right? So that's like a treatise about law. Also, the Muqaddimah of Fakhr al-Razi in his great tafsir, right? So those are 4 Muqaddimat in general ulum that should be read as standalone treatises. In Dawah, the Muqaddimah of a Dawah Tamma is such a treatise, right? So among the scholars of Imam Haddad's tradition, they encourage studying this Muqaddimah of this text as a treatise, teaching us about the obligation and some understanding of what summoning to Allah is. So consider this like a general or foundational text about inviting to Allah, as opposed to a more specific text about inviting to Allah, right? So you might have a short text authored about interpersonal dawah, inviting one person inviting another person closer to Allah, and how they should deal with them, and how they should gift to them, and how they should be gradual, and so on and so on. Levels of introduction. That's more specific. This is more general. So consider this like more of a fundamental text, not necessarily, especially this Muqaddimah, which is what we're tasking ourselves to cover. We'll do shura with some of the organizers and see if we want to read through the rest of it because it's quite long, or whether we want to move on to some other shorter text and then let you read through this on your own. So he discusses ad-da'wa ilallah here, though we also mentioned there's other gems that he includes, like a list of al-mujaddideen, and describing some of the works of those great imams who engaged in tajdeed, la ilaha illallah. So ad-da'wa at-tamma, we've known the author is Imam al-Haddad. He lived in the 12th Islamic century. If you want to memorize his dates of birth and death, 1044 to 1132. He's talking to us about what? Ad-da'wa ilallah. In general, he's going to tell us what it is, but in specific, we would like you to note a definition or two. Right? So one definition of da'wah is sidqu al-amal bi shari'atillah wa husni tablighihi. Wa husnu tablighihi. Sidqu al-amal bi shari'atillah wa husnu tablighihi. An honest adherence to Allah's Sharia and an excellent transmission of it. An honest adherence to Allah's Sharia and an excellent adherence to it. So one's genuine in one's application and one's excellent in one's propagation. Another definition, summoning to Allah, or a da'wah to Allah, is making Allah's rulings clear to His slaves. Making Allah's rulings clear to His slaves and summoning them to adhere to these rulings by any means. Making Allah's rulings, or you could say making Allah's laws clear to His slaves and summoning them to adherence to these laws by any means. And it's understood, if we're calling to adherence, that we mean by permissible means. Can't start a nightclub and say that that's inviting to Allah. Right? So by any means, that might be praying for people. That might be showing them good akhlaq. And those are some of the most fundamental of means. That might be speaking to them. That might be feeding them. That might be being charitable. That might be doing khutbah. That might be a one-on-one interpersonal dawah. Any means. That might be use of media, whether it be print, audio, or visual. That might be through starting a sports team. any permissible means. And we need to employ more and more means and less, not less and less, more and more means beyond the same means that are always used for that choir to whom we always preach. Right? Because the majority of the people are beyond that. The Muslims much less than not. Right? 90% of them are not in the masjid. And Allah knows best. Is that accurate? Do we say 90% of the Muslims? 60%. 60%, okay.
In America.
60% are not in the masajid. At least on a weekly or monthly basis. So means to get that other reach that other 60%. They're not likely to be khutbah Jummah, right? You might do better by cultural night, or basketball team or something. In our majalis, we was telling the brothers that coordinate. There's young men that we've never seen them except at a barbecue. So just doing khutbah all the time isn't going to get very far with them. You got to do something else. So da'wah ilallah, that's another definition. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about what it is, and we'll begin. And we're deliberately being somewhat lengthy and introducing the imam and the text, and it's important. You should attach to any author of sacred sciences that you read, because your heart connecting to them is one of the most powerful means of your gaining from what they have to offer. But also, we were somewhat lengthy in our introduction, because hopefully, as we put out our emails and such, and as you all invite some other brothers and sisters, we might have some others joining us, inshaAllah ta'ala. But Bismillah, we'll begin this muqaddimah, and you are starting with the author's introduction, but start with your own Bismillah, because he's already mentioned it. And raise your voice so the sisters can hear.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. God most high and immense, mighty and invincible, says in his august book to his truthful and trustworthy messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, call to the path of your Lord with wisdom and gracious exhortation, and debate with them in the best manner. Your Lord knows best those who have erred from his path, and he knows best those who are rightly guided. And he says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, exalted be he, say, this is my way. I call to God in full awareness, I and those who follow me, and transcendent is God, and I am not one of those who associate with him. And he says, exalted be he, and whose speech is more excellent than he who calls to God, does good works, and says, I am one of the Muslims. And he says, exalted be he, let there be a community among you who invite to goodness, enjoin good, forbid evil. Those are they who will succeed.
So the Imam says in his muqaddimah, in his introduction, and he mentions a point that the translator didn't translate, Dr. Mustafa, Allah yahfadu. He says, and we mention in this introduction, where we discuss in this introduction, inviting to Allah Ta'ala and to his deen, which can be translated as his religion, and it is Al-Islam. The deen is what Allah has prescribed on the tongue of his Prophet of laws that Allah has prescribed on the tongue of his Prophet. That is the deen, and it's synonymous with Islam and with the Sharia. So inviting to Allah, inviting to his deen, inviting to Allah's way, translating path, not one of the other translations of way like manhaj or tariq. So he mentions da'wah, he mentions al-amr bidhalik, the command, right? Da'wah is a command. It's an obligation, and these verses, as we'll mention, indicate that. And we'll talk about its ruling. He mentions its virtue, and he encourages it. So he'll tell us what da'wah is. He doesn't come out and give a specific definition, but in general, it'll be understood from what he says, and we gave some simple definitions. He'll talk about it as a command. We'll talk about its ruling, and then he'll mention its virtue, and he'll encourage it. So we hope to take from this an understanding of the obligation and a concern for it, right? Not necessarily detailed means. That this text doesn't employ detailed means as much, but it's more, again, fundamental. And we should have a concern, an understanding that this is an obligation, right? So like you move to North America and you work and you earn and you educate your kids and you're surrounded by unbelievers, negligence. Inviting to Allah is an obligation, right? He's going to talk about that, and then also its virtue. And then he'll mention other specific questions and immense benefits, he says. So there's immense benefit in this, the Imam is saying to us. So Allah mentions to us in His book, He orders us to summon to the way of your Lord. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika. He ordered the Prophet ﷺ actually, because he's speaking to the Prophet ﷺ in the second person singular. And all of the Quran, he's the one who's initially addressed. And then from him that light spreads to the rest of us. He ordered Al-Habib, summon to the way of your Lord. Right? And in usul we say, right, in the principles of sacred texts, how they're interpreted, an order indicates obligation. When Allah orders, it indicates obligation. Al-amr lil wujub. Summon to the way of your Lord with wisdom, beautiful admonition, and debate them in the manner that is best. Your Lord knows best those who are misguided, and He knows those who are rightly guided. He also orders Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say, this is my way, I summon to Allah. Right? So all of us, we're getting ready to sit and sing about Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam for an hour, inshallah ta'ala, in a minute. Inshallah. We claim to love him, claim to want to follow him. Tayyib, if we want to follow him, that's his way. The way of the Prophet ﷺ is a da'wah ilallah. Wada'i ilallah bi'idhnihi. Allah called him a summoner to Allah by Allah's permission. There was one of the Salihin in a city called Shiban. And what did he do? He summoned to Allah. Always. Maybe we'll bring some quotes of him. And there was one of the Salihin in Al-Madinah who often saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? He had a lot of ru'ya of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he'd see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he'd be mentioned this specific Salih in Hadramaut. His name escapes me right now. So then this man in Medina asked the Hadarim when they came, who is so and so? What do you know about so and so? They said, what we know about him is he's engaged in da'wah ilallah. Right? Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is his way. He calls to Allah. Right? Ala basira ana wa man ittaba'ani. He says, me and those who closely follow me. Right? And he has immense concern for those who do his work, which is ad-da'wah ilallah. The brothers that we really envy aren't the ones who's memorized a whole lot, though we do admire that and envy that in a good way, inshallah. We have ghibta. We wish we memorized more. But the brothers who are really effective in inviting to Allah, helping people come closer to Allah, that's what we really envy. Have ghibta. Wish we had more of that, because that is that we know that's extremely beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. And you find those are people who have a lot of ru'ya of the Prophet ﷺ. They see him a lot. He has a lot of concern for them, because that's his work, right? He's a messenger, so of course he's going to be concerned with the message and how it's being transmitted, and those who are continuing to transmit it on his behalf, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. La ilaha illallah. And he said, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنَ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. And who speaks better than the one who summons to Allah? And that's first and foremost the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then his khulafa, then his vicegerents. And then Allah says, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ. Let there be of you a group who summons to Allah. Right? So all of these verses indicate that this is an obligation. However, this last verse indicates that it's a collective obligation. It's fard kifaya. Right? Fard kifaya. Right? It's fard kifaya. So that means, so non-Muslim so-and-so on this block. Right? If they don't get invited to Allah, all of us are negligent. Because it's fard kifaya. Right? And Allah give us to convey in the best way. Right? But if someone's reached them, that lifts the obligation from the rest. That doesn't mean they're not still rewarded for doing so, but it's an obligation on the group. Right? However, the invitation of the heart is a personal obligation. Right? So the hadith says, if you see a wrong, then change it with your hand. It's hadith of Muslim. من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بلسانه. فإن لم يستطيع, فليغيره بيده. You change it with his hands. فإن لم يستطيع فبلسانه. If you can't, then with his tongue. فإن لم يستطيع فبقلبه. If he's not able to change it with his tongue, then he must change it with his heart. The first two are communal obligations, fard kifaya. The last one is a personal obligation. Ibn Hajar al-Haytami of the Fuqaha says that. Right? Every single believer, when they see someone falling into a wrong, which is distancing that person from Allah, and our job is to summon them to Allah, we are obliged to make inkar of that or change that with our heart. Right? So that means if you're walking around, or I'm walking around with no concern to invite the creatures to their creator, just A-okay that people are distant, you're neglecting a personal obligation. Even if you're not knowledgeable, even if you're not eloquent, even if you're not in a position of authority or power where you can reach them and deliver the message verbally or some other way to them, you have to have a concern for what's occurring and endeavor with your heart to change it, right? So that's a ruling, right? So in terms of actively engaging it, collective obligation, if it's neglected, we're all at fault. In terms of the heart's disapproval of the distance from Allah, and mercy and concern for the perpetrator, that is a personal obligation. Right? And there's a subtlety in that hadith. And if they're not able with their tongue, then with their heart. And that is ad'af al-iman. Right? And da'af in Arabic can mean weakness. But if it's on the third form, muda'afa, it means multiplication. So that would say that's the most exponential iman. If someone who has a himma, that they can change munkar with their heart. And even the fuqaha discuss that. Like a salih who has strong himma and he can change a munkar, is he obliged to do it with his heart or not? Yeah. So our shuyukh taught us, you change a munkar with your heart by three things. First of all, disapproval. Right? How could we not disapprove of seeing Allah disobeyed and the Prophet ﷺ sunnah departed from? And that creature harming themselves. Of course we're concerned about it. We disapprove. So we neglect that disapproval, big mistake. You're neglecting an obligation, and the problem is that darkness will pour into your heart. So in an environment like this, if you're not concerned for these people and what's going on, the harm of that is constantly affecting you. So the first is that you disapprove, right? The second is that you have mercy for the perpetrator. So inkar without mercy is typically not very effective. So if it's just anger, it's not very effective. Prophet ﷺ, his invitation coincided with mercy. The third is that you pray to Allah for that person in your heart. Oh Allah, guide them. Oh Allah, help change their condition. Introduce them to Al-Habib ﷺ like you introduced me to Al-Habib. Right? So someone who, when they see that, they disapprove. SubhanAllah, Maskina. Nobody taught her anything better than to wear some Daisy Dukes. Right? Oh Allah, guide her. That'll have an impact on that person. And it, more importantly, that's a good heart transaction between you and your Lord in that circumstance. And to neglect that is like it's callous. It's callous and it's dense. It's like heedless. And the heedlessness and the darkness of that environment, if you're neglecting this obligation, will have a very adverse effect on your own condition. And we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. And with that we will stop, inshallah. So we keep to our time. And inshallah we're working on our time and practicing our space. And we ask, especially from our sisters, we might have to, but also from our brothers, we might have to move this way, move that way. Please forgive us. But right now, it suited our resources in terms of human and monetary resources best to shorten Ribat some and hold it in a home. And we're in the process of looking for a space, inshaAllah ta'ala. So pray that Allah grant us to find a good space. And in the meantime, if there's space in hearts to accommodate one another, that makes a small space encompass us still. But if we're impatient with one another, then no space will be big enough. So please be patient with us. If we have to move here, trade rooms, what have you, we're going to improve that room over there and use it for a Badr Brothers Majlis, possibly for some child care, and then also sisters sitting to eat. And sometimes they might pray a sisters Jamaat and we pray a brothers Jamaat here. We'll use it for all of those. So we're trying to make better use of this space, but please be patient with us, inshaAllah ta'ala. And I'll stop for time's sake. As Maghrib comes earlier, Sirah and Salawat will be pushed past Maghrib, inshaAllah, and that'll give us a little more time in this Asr slot. The next couple of weeks, we're going to be compressing some things before Maghrib, but bear with us, and we will update everyone, inshaAllah ta'ala, by email of the various changes and the details of the schedule, and also that will go up on the website, inshaAllah. Next week, we will not meet on Sunday. Sisters may do a Sirah and Salawat at perhaps even a different location, but a sisters only Sirah and Salawat, and we'll all meet brothers and sisters in 2 weeks again, inshaAllah ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take us all by the hand in khair and lutf and afiyah, and grant us to be honest, sincere, that He give us accepted words, good teaching, call and guidance, that Allah be pleased with us and please the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that Allah grant the reward of this Fatiha to our parents, our teachers, our sheikhs, anyone who we have wronged or who owes us a right or who has asked us for prayers, and to the presence of a Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Fatiha.